Chapter 9. What are the psychological foundations of an American education? A medical student who wants intensely to be a surgeon has marvelous hands and displays a high level of technical skill, but does not know how the body functions or what constitutes health can hardly be called a doctor. An aspirant to the ministry who loves to work with people and possesses a marvelous gift of speaking, but also no opinion about humanity's relationship to God or about the purpose of religion, can hardly be suited for religious ministry. And a person who has great desire to be with young people, wants to live the life of a teacher, and possesses great technical skill but lack purpose of direction, and hardly a teacher. These three individuals are like wind-up toys, moving along blindly without a plan or an intellectual compass. Although this image may be somewhat dramatic, there are people who prepare for professions without delving into a core meaning of what those professions are all about. Such directionless behavior can cause problems in any occupation or profession, but is particularly vexing in teaching. What kind of a teacher, occupation or profession, but is particularly vexing in teaching? What kind of a teacher can someone be who lacks a view of what people are and a vision of what they can become? Who cannot clearly define a right or wrong in human behavior, who doesn't recognize what is important and what is unimportant, or can distinguish clear thinking from sloppy thinking? The person who would take on the responsibility for educating the young without having seriously wrestled with these questions is, to say the least, dangerous, because the individual is going against the very grain of what it means to be a teacher. In fact, it is safe to say such a person is not a teacher, but a technician. This chapter introduces you to philosophy of one of the foundational subjects in education. Philosophy, along with history, psychology, and to some degree education, economics, politics, science, sociology, anthropology, and the law, forms of intellectual underpinning on which the practice of education rests. The study of physiology helps the teacher systematically reflect on issues that are central to education, including such basic concepts as learning, teaching, being educated, knowledge, and the good life. What is philosophy? The word philosophy is made up of two root words, love, philo, and the wisdom, sophis. It is the most basic sense of philosophy is the love of wisdom, although not all the people love wisdom in the same way to some degree. All humans are questioning beings that are seekers of answers. As children, we are preoccupied with such lofty questions. How do I ever get fewer veggies and more dessert? Then we progress to such questions as, how do the teachers always know how to call me on I don't know the answers, and what do I need to get a decent grade in geometry? Ultimately, may move more fundamental levels of questioning. Who am I? What is the purpose of life? And what am I doing here? And what does it mean to be a really good person? Fundamental questions of existence. Until approximately 100 years ago, most people relied on religion and philosophy for answers such as fundamental questions, whereas religion is said to represent the revealed Word of God. Philosophy represents a human attempt to sort out by reason the fundamental questions of existence. Many of the great thinkers of Western civilization, Plato, Aristotle, St. Thomas Aquinas, René Descartes, John Jacques Rousseau, Immanuel Kant, Friedrich Nietzsche, John Locke, John Stuart Mill, Williams, James Alfred North Whitehead, and John Dewey have been philosophers. Because education has always been a central human concern, philosophies have thought it has written a great deal about education and questions surrounding it. 23 centuries ago in ancient Greece, Aristotle puzzled over how to educate the young. In modern times, there are opposing views about the practical of education. There is not a general agreement about what the young should learn, either in relation to virtue or in relation to the best life, nor is it clear whether the education ought to be directed more towards intellect than toward character of should. And it is not certain whether training should be directed at things useful in life or those conducted to virtue or non-essentials. And there is no agreement as to what in effect is tend toward virtue. Men do not all prize most highly the same virtue, so naturally they are different, also the proper training for it. Aristotle then we went off to some of the most powerful, profound answers to these questions in human history. The nature of philosophy. Only a few people in our society are professional philosophers who earn their daily bread, usually a rather mere figure, by pursuing answers to the fundamental questions of life. However, all of us who wrestle with such questions as who am I and what am I doing with my life are engaging in philosophical activity. Although a distinction may be made between the few professional philosophers and a vast number of amateur philosophers, the question we ask is the answers we glean usually have a major influence on the practical affairs of our lives and determine how we choose to spend our life force. For instance, the very practical decision of whether to become a teacher, a real estate broker, or a professional poker player almost always has its roots in a person's philosophy of life, whether that person knows it or not. The philosopher's method and language. Basically, philosophers are concerned with the meaning of the things that are interpretation of those meanings. They have intense interest in the real meanings of words. For example, although some philosophical discussion and writing involves technical language, it generally uses plain language, the ordinary language of people. At the same time, philosophers try to be extremely clear and careful about their use of terms. They do not want their ultimate goal, getting in the meaning of things, to become lost in thickets of fuzzy language. Although the philosophy appears to deal with the simple issues in simple language, behind the philosopher's questions are raging debates about profound issues that can have far-reaching implications. For example, the question, what is a human, leads to other questions such as, is a fetus a human, and when is ever can a fetus be aborted? A question such as, what rights do severely disabled persons have, or should humans clone humans? Before you go much further in this chapter, you should clarify whether you stand today. What are your answers to these philosophical questions? What are your fundamental life questions to which you are seeking answers? What are the ends of goals of the education you will provide students? The terrain of philosophy. Philosophy covers large amounts of intellectual turf. The terrain of philosophy is divided into several areas, including four that are particularly important to the teacher: metaphysics, epistemology, exology, and logic. These are four branches of philosophy, are central to the educative process and speak directly to the work of the teacher. Metaphysics. Metaphysics involves the attempt to explain the nature of the real world or the nature of existence. It attempts to answer the question, what is real, without relying on revealed religions such as the Bible. Most metaphysicians believe that it is not possible to address fundamental matters such as a human nature being of the universe simply by collecting data and formulating statistically significant generalization. For the most metaphysical perspectives, the true nature of a person cannot be captured by measuring or counting alone. That is, a person is more than a sum of his or height or in a way IQ. In probing the nature of reality, a metaphysician asks a whole array of questions. Does life have meaning? Are humans being free or totally determined? Is there a purpose to life? Is there a set of enduring principles that guide the operations of the universe? Can these principles be known? Is there such thing as stability? Is our world ever changing? Metaphysics in the curriculum. The abstract questions addressed by the metaphysicists are one the educator cannot dismiss. Ultimately, the purpose of education is to explain reality to the young. The curriculum and the way in which we teach represent our statement of what the reality is and the reality of which we teach. In other words, that a curriculum of school represents the community believes in the most learning. Along with teachers, actually the metaphysicians, they do not stand on metaphysical questions. If a teacher decides to teach because he or she believes the most important thing in the universe is a human mind, that creative decision is driven by a metaphysical view, the importance of an individual person. The people who serve on school boards also take stands on metaphysical issues. For example, whether a particular school system makes a major investment in educating individuals with severe mental disabilities and emphasis vocational education depends very, very much on someone's mental, physical, and the nature of the person, the place, work, and the person's life. Epistemology. Epistemology deals with questions regarding knowledge and knowing. The epistemology is seeking the truth nature of knowing about questions. What is a true knowing? And is truth elusive, always changing, and always dependent on the truth seekers, particularly the time, place, and angle of vision? Some people whom we all skeptics question of our capacity to ever really know the truths of existence. Other who agonists are convinced that there are no truths and that seeking knowledge of ultimate reality is a wasted effort and an empty hope. Epistemology deals with not only the nature of the truth but also the ways in which we only know reality. Questions such as how do we become to know the truth and what are the sources of gaining knowledge are part of the conversation. There are a variety of ways by which we can reality, each and has its own advocates, detractors. Among the ways of knowing about the divine revelation by authority through personal intuition, from our own five senses, from our own power reasons, or through experimentation. Teaching and ways of knowing. Questions concerning knowledge and knowing are almost by definition of great concern to the teacher. The epistemological question, how do you know that, goes to the heart of teaching methodology. If a teacher wants her students to have a concept of democracy, how does she proceed? Does she explain the characteristics of different forms of government, such as monarchy and oligarchy and characteristics? Exology. Exology focuses on the nature of what we value, how we value it. As human beings, we naturally search for the correct and most effective way to live. In doing so, we inevitably encounter questions of values. Of course, when different people look at life, they often come up with very different sets of values. For instance, hedonists believe in seeking pleasure and living over the moment. By contrast, Stoics have an endless way of looking at life and seeking to be affected by pleasure or pain. Many people regard values from a religious perspective, asserting that unless God originally created humanity and the rest of the natural world, existence that we know is just a meaningless coming together for the cosmic dust and debris. According to this view, the only genuine values derive from God. Most people would agree with this. Socrates described in the Leaders of Education future that schools have a dual responsibility to make people smart, to make them good, to the degree except to the second function, that it is to assist their students become good people. They are grappling with an intellectual issue. In fact, teachers are intimately involved with questions of moral values. Young people are seeking ways to live lives and worthwhile, and teachers traditionally have been expected to help students establish moral values both as individuals and contributing members of society. How should education be reformed? In Chapter 8, what are the ethical and legal issues for facing teachers? For more discussion of the issue, moral values such as honesty, respect for other people, and fairness are necessary if we are to live together in harmony. Although a majority of people agree on a large core of values such as respecting others and avoiding violence and settling disputes, other value-related issues separate people. For example, certain sexual practices, capital punishment, gun control, and abortion are all contemporary social issues that evoke a wide range of viewpoints about the right or correct way for people to behave. Ethics and aesthetics. Exology has two subtopics: ethics and aesthetics. Ethics takes us into the realm of values that relate to good and bad behavior, examining morality and rules of conduct. At one time, teaching children how to deal with issues of good and bad and right and wrong, the primary purpose of schooling. In recent decades, the pendulum has swung the other way, and schools have become more concerned with transmitting factual and scientifically verifiable knowledge and skills than with installing ethical knowledge in students. More recently, signs indicate that schools are being called back to their earlier mission of helping children deal with these ethical issues. The subject of ethics not only teaches us how we can intellectually ascertain the right thing to do, but also is often used to help us establish a particular set of standards, such as Codes of Ethics, Chapter 8. What are ethical and legal issues facing teaching devotes particular attention to the issue of how we develop your own code of ethics. The second subtopic of aesthetics deals with questions of values regarding beauty and art. Many discussion about the value of a particular film book or work of art attempts to reach some aesthetic judgment of the value of the work, where the person has a good taste. An example of the common aesthetic judgment. Logic. Logic is the branch of philosophy that deals with reasoning. One of the fundamental qualities that distinguishes human beings from animals is that humans can think. The pursuit of logic is an attempt to think clearly and avoid vagueness and contradictions. Certain rules of logic have been identified, and they constitute the core of the branch of philosophy. Logic focuses on reasoning and modes of argument that brings us to a valid conclusions. A primary task of the schools is to help children think clearly and communicate logically. Two types of reasoning are commonly taught in schools: deductive and inductive. Deductive reasoning. In deductive reasoning, the teacher presents a general proposition and illustrates with a series of particulars. The most highly developed form is the approach with the classic method of Sejlon. In a Sejlon, one makes two statements, and the third statement, the conclusion, is deductive and drawn from them. For instance, all human beings are mortal. I am a human being, therefore I am mortal. In this kind of deductive reasoning, the general proposition is an abstract concept. It is followed by a factual statement, which is in turn leads to a new factual statement and the creation of new near knowledge, at least for the learner. As another example, imagine that in October, Miss Wells, a fifth grade teacher, writes the following statement on the board. All trees shed their leaves at the end of the growing season are deciduous trees. As 2-week project, Miss Wells asked her class to observe and record data about trees surrounding her school. For 2 weeks, the students observed 3 dozen maple trees shedding their leaves during the fall. The teacher then writes his earlier sentence on the board again. Okay. Inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning works at the opposite fashion. With this type of reasoning, the teacher sets forth particulars from which a general proposition is derived or induced. For instance, the teacher may wish to lead the students to the discovery that water is essential to plant growth. He gives each child two slimmer plants of different types from weeds to flowers for each child, and then has each student daily from plant to the water when I have other plant without water. After 10 days, the teacher has the students report the conditions of the plants. From all of these individual reports, he leads the students and generalizes about the necessity of water to plant life, in fact, that we have induced their nature. Although the deductive and inductive forms of reasoning are opposites, both are essential to logical thought and therefore need to be developed, and learners effective teachers on a variety of learning activities, some which I like the tree example. Logic is not confined in inductive and deductive reasoning. To think logically means to think clearly in many different ways. Teachers need logic in many aspects of the work, from trying to understand the behavior of a child who seems to have an erratic learning pattern to develop tests that correctly measure what has been taught in the course. Most of all, teachers need to be modeled this clear, logical thinking for students. Overall, the four branches of philosophy, metaphysics, epistemology, exology, and logic, address some of the major concerns of the teacher. We now consider the answers they suggest to the teacher, the implications they have for actual classroom. Subject-centered philosophies. The first two schools of philosophy, perennialism and essentialism, stress the importance of a subject matter, knowledge, and education. Both schools of thought show a strong allegiance to this curriculum, and both argue that well-educated students should possess a defined body of knowledge. Also, both often get a bump rap being labeled as a teacher-centered. The label teacher-centered conjures up images of an authoritarian teacher turning himself or herself into the center of attention, making all the decisions and attempting to control everything that goes in on the classroom. Clearly, authoritism is an ego trip and can hide behind each of the four philosophies we will explore. Although they are convinced of the importance of the certain knowledge, subject-centered teachers can be passionately committed to student learning. Perennialism, which is derived primarily from the writings of Plato, views truth and nature, in particular human nature, as constant, objective, unchanging beneath superficial differences from one century or decade to the next. The rules that govern the world and the characteristics of the human nature stay the same. The purpose of life, according to Plato, is that the search of these consistent, changeless truth, which reside in the nature of things. This search is achieved through the Socratic dialogue and dialect of a process in which ideas debated in the back and forth discussion of on some recognizable clarity is reached, essential to undertaking such a pursuit in mental discipline and rational thought process. Education as preparation for life. Education is one of the great importance to perennialists, but in an education that is rigorous and demanding, perennialists insist that education and preparation for life, and therefore believe that it should not attempt to intimidate life or be lifelike. Students should engage in a rigorous examination of the classics, mostly ancient but some modern, to discover the timeless wisdom embodied in this lecture rather than focusing on knowledge that might be seen personally meaningful. In summary, the perennialist view is that a person learns through disciplined study of the great works and ideas in human history. This view leans heavily on the authority of the collected wisdom of the past and looks to traditional thought to guide us in the present. As such as the curriculum is structured and clearly defined, perennialists also see education as protecting and conserving the best thought from the past. In this sense, they favor very traditional conservative of the best part. View of education. The following study presents the point of view of a more or less typical perennial teacher. Essentialism is a uniquely American philosophy of education that began in the 1930s and 1940s as a reaction to what we've seen of overemphasis on a child-centered approach to education and a concern that students were not gaining appropriate, adequate knowledge in schools. The roots of essentialism. Essentialism has its philosophical origin in two older philosophies and drawn some things from each. From Plato's idealism, it takes a view of the mind as the central tool for understanding an objective and unchanging reality, as well as learning those essential ideas and knowledge that we need to live well. From Aristotle's realism, it takes the tenet that the mind learns through contact with the physical world. According to this view that we know reality, we must learn to observe and measure the physical world accurately. From our observations, we use our reasoning ability to gain new knowledge. This contrasts with the perennial view that reasoning alone can lead to truth. In many ways, essentialism sounds like a good like perennialism. Although these two types of views have so much in common, some important differences exist between them. For instance, essentialists do not focus as intently on truth as do perennials. They are less concerned with the classics as being the primary repository of worthwhile knowledge. Instead of essentialists search for what will help a person live a productive life today. If the current economic reality strongly suggests that students need to graduate from high school with their computer literacy, for example, essentialists will find a place for this training in the curriculum. Progressivism. Progressivism is a relatively young philosophy of education. It came to prominence in the 1920s, growing out of the progressive political and social of the time. This school of thought drew some of the ideas of Roosevelt from the work of John Dewey, the most influential education philosopher of the 20th century, the leaders of education. Okay. The school as training ground for democracy. Unlike romantic educators who may see society as a negative influence on the student, progressives see society as an integral aspect of the student's life. Progressive view schools as a small societies in themselves, a place where students are learning as they live life, not simply preparing for life. This gives the progressive school a unique atmosphere, different from all the perennial storehouse of wisdom, a place of clearly defined roles and authority structures promoted by essentials. Progressive educators believe the school should be democratic in structure so that the children can learn to live well in a democracy and become good citizens. They emphasize group activities and group problem solving so that the students learn to work with others and help others. This is one reason many teachers who describe themselves as progressive educators are enthusiastic about cooperative learning strategies, such as those discussed in Chapter 5, What is Taught. And I think we are done.